The Indian city of Bhopal, the scene of the world's worst industrial disaster. Deadly gas leaked from a chemical plant belonging to the giant American company Union Carbide.
I am confident that the victims can be fairly and equitably compensated without a material adverse effect on the financial condition of Union Carbide Corporation.
What happened in Bhopal was not something that happened overnight. It was a disaster in making.
The gas spread so rapidly that people had no chance whatsoever to react.
Most importantly, 25,000 people dead, so many injured, not a single individual or corporation behind bars.
It's the early hours of December 3rd, 1984. You suddenly wake up choking on the very air you breathe. It smells like boiled cabbage. Then it starts to burn. Your eyes swell shut. Your lungs fill with fluid. You scramble for the door, but outside, the entire city is screaming.
At one point, an official said one death was being recorded every minute from the poison gas leak in the city of Bhopal.
This was the reality of one of the deadliest corporate disasters in history. On this tragic morning in Bhopal, India, families stumbled into the streets coughing up blood and collapsing in the dark.
It felt like somebody poured chilies in our eyes and as if somebody choked our throats.
By morning, the streets were jammed with bodies. But this wasn't a freak accident. One engineer had even warned they were putting an atomic bomb in the middle of the factory. What horrifying things did the gas leak do to people's bodies? How did Union Carbide manage to avoid any criminal charges? And why was a vital antidote that could have saved thousands held back from hospitals? We'll uncover how corporate greed turned a sleeping city into a gas chamber. And along the way, we'll hear from social activist Rachna Dhingra, who has spent decades working with survivors in Bhopal. This is the story of India's Chernobyl, the Bhopal gas tragedy.
In your opinion, were people operating the MIC plant without the proper knowledge and experience?
It might get me into trouble, but yes, I feel that there were a few people. Obviously, I won't name names. I feel there were a few people who were not really fit to work in that unit.
To understand Bhopal, you have to understand the promise that was sold. In the 1960s, India was fighting a war against famine. The Green Revolution promised a future of high-yield crops, but those crops had a price. They needed massive amounts of pesticides. Union Carbide, the American chemical giant, saw a profitable opportunity and stepped in. At the top was CEO Warren Anderson. Their miracle product was a pesticide called 7. For locals, it was a job opportunity, a promise of better crops and economic prosperity. But buried inside that promise was a hidden ingredient, one of the deadliest chemicals on Earth, methyl isocyanate, or MIC. Carbide's own internal documents described inhaling it as a path to possible death. When they tested it on rats, the results were reportedly so horrifying, the company suppressed the data.
MIC was extremely pungent, and anywhere it would touch on your body where there is fluid, so especially in your eyes, it would cook the proteins in your eye, and that's where your eyes would get swollen.
It gets even darker. Carbide's classified studies warned that when MIC gets hot enough, it breaks down and produces hydrocyanic acid, a gas linked to immediate death. Those same studies pointed to an antidote, which was kept a secret. One man saw the disaster coming. Project lead Eduardo Munoz fought for a safer design. No stockpiles, no massive tanks, just small batches of MIC made on demand. Let's just say Munoz's concerns were noted and, to put it bluntly, ignored. Instead, they chose massive high-risk storage for faster profits. Warning signs started piling up. In 1981, an employee died from toxic gas exposure.
Public opinion at that point of time started changing, you see. Laymen, they started realizing that what we're doing in Carbide is not only providing jobs and employment, but it's also dangerous.
And that was just one of many red flags. In 1982, a major leak forced a full-scale evacuation of the surrounding neighborhoods.
In 1982, they celebrated Safety Week. We wrote to the government saying even in Safety Week we're having accidents.
It didn't make global headlines, but it was enough to trigger a high-level inspection of the plant. American engineers were brought in to take a look. They didn't just find a few safety violations. They found 60. But the bottom line was all that mattered. By 1984, profits were low due to droughts in the region. Union Carbide's response was to axe safety training from 6 months to just 15 days. They also slashed the workforce almost in half and left critical manuals in English instead of the local language, Hindi. The very men tasked with keeping the city safe were the most ill-equipped, and the final nail in the coffin was brutally simple. At that point, the trap had already been set. Bhopal had become exactly what they were warned about: an atomic bomb of chemicals sitting in the middle of a crowded city. On the night of December 2nd, the trap finally sprang. It started with a routine pipe wash. A safety barrier should have blocked the water from reaching the MIC tanks, but it was never installed. The water moved through leaking valves and toward the worst possible destination, Tank 610.
The refrigeration system that was used to keep MIC at a cooling temperature was shut down just to save some $30 to $40 a day in Bhopal.
Then, the chemistry turned violent. The moment water hit the warm MIC, it triggered a runaway exothermic reaction. In basic terms, a sudden release of heat. Inside Tank 610, the temperature surged. Pressure shot up. The liquid began to boil and break down, turning into a massive wave of toxic gas. Workers in the rinsing area noticed their eyes starting to sting. They found brownish water with a small cloud hanging over it. Gas was already escaping. They raised the issue with their supervisor, but he brushed it off. And instead of treating it like a disaster, they stopped for tea. Then, Tank 610 ruptured in an explosive geyser. And shortly after, another tank. An ominous cloud of gas began to gather. This was the moment that turned years of warnings and red flags into a death warrant. The systems that were supposed to protect Bhopal had already been stripped down, disconnected, or left useless. As the gas surged, every line of defense failed. There was no backup, no brake, no off switch. The gas started rolling in like a white ghost into nearby neighborhoods. Among the first visible victims were animals out in the open. Witnesses described cows staggering, vomiting yellow froth, and collapsing where they stood. Then, the gas reached the people.
So what MIC basically did, that it stayed low to the ground, and people who lived right across the factory or in most part of the Bhopal, they did not have concrete houses. They were all houses made of, thatched roof or wooden planks, and it was easy for the gas to go in. So as people were finding it hard to breathe and they were coughing, they opened their doors, and as soon as they opened their doors, almost all the gas went in. And when the gas went in, it was like it was a death chamber. It was a gas chamber.
Imagine opening your eyes and feeling like they've been scrubbed with acid. First comes the burning, then the choking, then the panic. Throats tightened, lungs filled. People stumbled into the streets half blind, gasping for air that was only making things worse. Some convulsed, others fell unconscious immediately.
People started running towards the hospital. The more they ran, they were frothing from their mouths and dying in their own body fluids.
Running only made the gas deadlier. Research later showed that many who stayed still, stayed inside, or kept their breathing shallow had better odds of survival.
People didn't know that if they just covered themselves up with wet cloth, it wouldn't burn so much.
And because MIC is water soluble, a wet cloth over the nose and mouth could help neutralize some of the gas long enough to find safety. There was a second simple survival trick. Because the gas stayed low to the ground, climbing to a second floor or a rooftop could move you above the kill zone. A wet rag, a few stairs, breathing less. Those are brutally simple survival lessons, and thousands were never told any of them. No emergency guidance from Union Carbide. No one telling families that panic would make it worse. Patients began flooding into Hamidia Hospital who were going blind, suffocating, and convulsing. Soon, it looked less like a clinic and more like a morgue that had run out of room. And that antidote we mentioned earlier, not a single person received it.
Since the accident, the 500 doctors in Bhopal have been working without rest, but the number of people needing treatment continues to grow as more and more victims are found lying helplessly in their homes.
When these people went to the hospitals, the hospital management called up Union Carbide asking what should they give to people to make them feel better? What should we give them? And Union Carbide's response of that day and this day is no different. It is like tear gas. Just give them water and everything will be okay.
Imagine hearing that while your wards are filling with bodies. Union Carbide had never properly informed Bhopal's medical teams about the true nature of MIC. And when doctors asked the obvious question, what is the antidote? The response was chilling. There is no known antidote. Except that wasn't the full story. Because what happened next is one of the most underreported parts of Bhopal. A German scientist brought 10,000 doses of sodium thiosulfate as a possible antidote for MIC exposure. At first, Union Carbide said it was safe to administer, and doctors saw encouraging results. But later, the company reversed its position. Sodium thiosulfate was banned across Bhopal.
Now we know, many years later again, that Carbide's first response was not to go to their doctors. Their first response was to go to their lawyers.
Union Carbide had maintained that it was just tear gas, and they knew that if an antidote started helping victims, it would expose a much bigger truth, and an even bigger liability. And while the hospitals were drowning, local heroes stepped in. At the Bhopal railway station, the cloud turned the platforms into a death trap.
When the train stopped, I could smell gas. It smelled as if someone had let off tear gas.
The station master, Ghulam Dastagir, realized the horror unfolding and stayed at his post, frantically signaling trains to stop or bypass the city instead of pulling into a station full of poison. Other railway workers ran onto the tracks with lamps, waving desperately through the thick fog. But the engineer of the Gorakhpur Express didn't understand the warnings until it was too late. The train struck and killed 4 of those workers. Their actions helped save thousands of lives, while Dastagir himself survived with health complications that would haunt him for the rest of his life. And then, because this story wasn't already somehow horrifying enough, Bhopal faced a second panic. A couple of weeks after the incident, there was still MIC left in the other tanks. The government's solution was to restart the factory and process the remaining gas into pesticide to get rid of it. They called this Operation Faith. To the people of Bhopal, that meant restarting the death factory. Half the city panicked and fled, convinced they were about to be poisoned all over again. The gas cloud was fading. The excuses were just beginning.
Safety is the responsibility of people who operate in our plants. And you can't, in a system of this nature, take that responsibility off their shoulders and delegate it to somebody else.
After the leak, Union Carbide reached for a familiar defense: blame an employee. But that worker was never found, and the story explained none of the real problems. The ignored warnings, the gutted safety systems, the dead alarms, and the years of cost-cutting that made a disaster like this inevitable. Then came Warren Anderson. Union Carbide's CEO flew to India on December 7th, saying he wanted to face the disaster in person. Instead, when he reached Bhopal, he was arrested on charges including culpable homicide. It looked, for a brief moment, like someone powerful might actually be held responsible. But that moment didn't last.
Warren Anderson, who was the chairman of UCC, came to India, signed a bail bond that he will return whenever courts ask him to. Never returned. He died a free man in his plush house somewhere in New York.
Indian leaders feared that keeping him in custody would scare off foreign companies from investing in India. It was a pattern that would define the next 40 years. When justice collided with profit, money won. The settlement told the same story.
The award in a case like this should be in the billions. They have $200 million insurance. That won't nearly cover for the loss of life and the tragedy.
In 1989, Union Carbide agreed to pay $470 million in compensation, 6 times less than what the Indian government had originally sought.
Imagine if such a thing happened in any other country. Unfortunately, in a country like India, they can't afford to fight giant multinationals like Union Carbide.
The deal was accepted without consulting the victims. And even 5 years later, many survivors still had not seen a single rupee of it.
The whole attempt was to wear down the Union of India, was to wear down the plaintiff, and to see that the case dragged on as much as possible.
Official figures showed that what remained of the payout worked out to less than 60,000 rupees for the death of a parent, around $650 US. And many long-term injury payouts were roughly around $500 US. We're talking survivors whose health and livelihoods had been destroyed for life. And the legal system never truly caught up.
Not a single person or a single corporation has gone to jail even for a day for killing 25,000 people, and maiming 500,000.
Later, in 2001, Dow Chemical bought Union Carbide. By then, cleanup responsibility had already been pushed onto the state government in the region. But Dow still refused responsibility for the contamination left behind. So the people who suffered most got pennies. The people at the top got distance. And Bhopal itself was left to rot.
Bhopal is an ongoing disaster that continues to kill and maim people even today. We have a new generation of children being born with birth defects.
More than 500,000 people suffered from the toxic cloud. Long after that night, survivors were still dealing with breathing problems, eye damage, cancer, tuberculosis, and chronic reproductive illnesses. The damage reached nearly every part of the body. As of 2002, 150,000 people were still chronically affected, and the disaster was still killing 10 to 15 people a month. Because Carbide never fully revealed the exact composition of the toxic cloud, doctors were never given a complete roadmap for how to treat victims. That means the cover-up didn't just shape the first night. It would shape the next 40 years and beyond. Then, there is the factory itself.
Now we are in a situation where 42 communities situated around the factory, where more than 200,000 people live, is contaminated with persistent organic pollutants and heavy metals.
Waste left in the open has poisoned the water for decades. Impoverished families were pushed into the only housing they could afford, the same contaminated zones near the plant. And the horror continues. Bhopal is now seeing a third generation of children born with birth defects linked to the disaster.
Bhopal is not isolated in history or by geography. Almost all of us are on this planet are victims of corporate crime, and slow and silent Bhopals are occurring all over the globe.
Bhopal was not one mistake. It was a chain of decisions. They were poisoned by the very air around them, then abandoned by the systems that were supposed to protect them. The gas moved on, but the damage stayed. Bhopal wasn't just a leak. It was a warning about what happens when safety gets sacrificed for profit. If you'd like to make a difference in this ongoing crisis, please consider donating to the charities listed in our description below. And if you think Bhopal was chaotic, wait until you see our episode on the Tokyo subway massacre, where a single man with a bottle of sarin gas paralyzed one of the busiest subway systems on Earth. See you next time on How to Survive.